Hello everyone, Harrowstorm here, and in this video I'm going to show you my Magicka Warden PvP build for the Harrowstorm patch. In this build, like in most of my previous iteration of my Magicka Warden, I was looking to have the most AoE pressure and AoE burst that I could on a Magicka Warden build while keeping really good resistances and tankiness as well as regen and healing power. And I am very happy with the results I've come to this patch. I feel like this build is a lot more solid than any of the previous builds that I've used in the last few patches on my Magicka Warden. While they were pretty good, I've always felt like a little bit of a spice was missing in those. They didn't do quite as good a damage as I wanted, and this build certainly has it. So let's go ahead and jump right into the stats. Now, as you can see, and this is unbuffed, we already have almost 40k max Magicka. Once we buff ourselves up really quickly in here, you can see that we get to 42k, a little bit more than 42k max Magicka, and I will discuss in just a little bit about a version that also has 50k Magicka with very minimal changes to the build. Our max health is currently at 25k, but once again, if we just buff ourselves up real quick, you will see that our max health goes up to a little bit over 27, almost 28k max health, which is really decent in my opinion, and our max stamina is at over 17k. So overall, our base stats are very high, as usually is the case with strong Magicka Warden builds. Our Magicka recovery right now is only at around 1300. However, it buffs up once we use our potion. It gets a little bit higher, at almost 1500 Magicka recovery. Plus, we are playing as a Breton, so Magicka sustain is really easy on our build, and we have our Netch to use as well as Magicka Warden. So really, our Magicka recovery, despite being slightly low, really solid. And our health recovery and stamina recovery, as you can see, are both very close to 1k as well. And so overall, our sustain on this build is really good on all departments, and I feel like it is a really huge powerhouse of this build. Next up, let's go to our spell stats. So if we buff ourselves up and go to the front bar, our spell damage is currently at 2.6 and our spell critical is at 50%. We're just gonna go ahead and attack a mob real quick to demonstrate our actual spell power. And our spell damage is at 3k on the front bar right now while we're buff up, and our spell critical is at 50%. Just gonna go ahead and kill this frost troll real quick. And let's continue. Next up, we got our resistances. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and buff up real quick. And our resists, as you can see, are at 25k spell resist and 23k physical resist. And then the 3k crit resist that I tend to run on all of my PvP builds. And on top of that, we also got Blood Spawn, which buffs these resistances to over 30k as well once it's on. And our spell penetration is at over 8k. So once again, really solid offensive stats, really solid defensive stats. Our overall resource pools are very strong, and our recoveries, while our Magicka recovery is slightly lower, they are very good as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you a version of this build where all we do is change our Mundus tone to the Mage Mundus. I am currently using the Lady, as I will discuss later on in this video, but if we go ahead and swap over to a version with the Mage Mundus, which I'm going to display here on the screen right now, then you can see we very easily get to 50k max Magicka. Now, a very important part of this build, something that is important to keep in mind, is now on Warden, since last patch, when you use your Permafrost, your max Magicka gets buffed. On this iteration of this build, on this version, even without the Mage Mundus, we get to 47k max Magicka right here without changing anything on the build that I'm currently running right now. Now let's go over to our sets and talk a little bit about those and why we use each one of them. So first of all, we are using our trusty Blood Spawn as per usual, with heavy and medium pieces, as the rest of our gear is in light. Blood Spawn is honestly just one of the best monster helms that exist in this version of ESO. A lot of the good monster helms have been nerfed, a lot of them have been changed. Bloodspawn remains one of the best ones in my opinion. Very, very well balanced, not even OP, but it gives you some stamina recovery, some resistances, and a lot of ultimate generation. The ultimate generation helps you a lot because your main ult that you want to use in this build is Permafrost, and it is a very expensive one, and the resistances you get from Bloodspawn make our resists jump over the 30k, so really, really solid monster helm. I really love using it, and I don't see myself stopping the use of it on the vast majority of my classes at this point. Next up, we are using Necropotence as per usual. I've been using this set on my Wardens for quite a long time. Honestly, it is just a really, really strong set. It gives you a lot of Magicka and then some if you have a pet active. Now, as Warden, obviously, we have our Betty Natch that we can have active at all time. And that gives us, other than the skill itself, that gives us a lot of things. It gives us the really, really easy access to the 5-piece bonus on Necropotence, making this set one of the easiest choices for a strong set for Magicka Wardens. And last, we are using a new set that I haven't been using before, which is Ice Furnace. We are now using on our jewelry pieces and the front bar, we are using Ice Furnace. The reason we're using this set is because of the really, really unique 5-piece that got buffed this patch a whole lot. Now, as it reads, when you deal frost damage, you deal an additional 2.5k flame damage to all enemies within 8 meters around the initial target. This effect can occur once every 1 second. Now, as you will see once I explain a little bit more about the skills we are running on this build, in pretty much any given moment, at any given moment, you're gonna have at least one frost damage ability active that hurts your opponents when you 1vx on this build. And so, at any given moment, you're gonna be dealing additional flame damage to your enemies every single second. There is no cooldown on Ice Furnace, and there are no additional conditions like there used to be on it. The damage got buffed on it a lot this patch. There are no additional conditions, meaning this set, as long as we can keep frost damage hitting our enemies, this set will be a huge source of additional damage in an AoE form as well, because it hits not one target, but all the enemies around the initial target. So, really, really, really strong offensive set, and I'm going to explain how it works exactly with my rotation later on in this video. We are using on the front bar a Lightning Staff of Ice Furnace. The reason for that is, as per usual, Lightning Staff is really good on Magicka Warden because most of our burst abilities are AoE based. When you are using AoE skills for your damage, a Lightning Staff is going to be your best friend because in its passives, it has this, and we're going to discuss it a little bit later on with the skills, but in the passives of a Lightning Staff, you are able to deal more damage in AoE form. So basically, all your AoE abilities are being buffed, and so we are using a Lightning Staff on the front bar, and on the back bar, we are running an Ice Staff of the Potentates. We're going to get to exactly why an Ice Staff and not a Sword and Board of Potentates later on when we discuss skills, but the reason we are running the Potentates is because it is just a really nice damage on the 2-piece. It gives you a reduction from all the damage that enemy players cause to you by 5%, which is a very, very decent piece to have on your back bar. Well, we don't have it on my front bar like I do on some of my other builds and like I did on the previous iteration of this Warden build. It is a really, really nice set to have on the back bar, even if we can't fit it on both bars at the moment. I'm gonna go over all of my pieces very quickly so you can see exactly the enchantments and traits I'm running on everything. Obviously, I'm using full impen on all my body pieces, and I'm using infused on all my jewelry pieces like I have been for quite some time. My enchantments and traits for the weapons have changed a little bit from the last patch, so I want to make sure to explain it to you guys, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the back bar trait and enchant a little bit later on when we talk about skills, but pay attention to what it is in case you want to use this build yourself as well. And yeah, this is pretty much the sets. It is important to note that I'm using 3 infused jewelry pieces, and I'm using currently 2 spell damage enchants and 1 recovery. And our spell damage enchants, we're using 2 of them at the moment because I feel like this is a very, very offensive build, and I don't feel like I need any more recoveries, so I'm using this one. But if you feel like you need a little bit more recovery on this build, you feel like what you have is not exactly enough, then I would recommend using yet another piece of Magicka recovery instead of spell damage. You're not losing too much spell damage from doing this, and you are gaining quite a bit of Magicka regen. So if this is something that you're lacking, definitely a good change to do on this build is to swap this enchant, and I feel like it could help you lots. Next up, we're going to go over and talk about the skills that we run in this build. Starting with the front bar, our first skill is Arctic Blast. Now, this skill is really overloaded with abilities. It gives you so much in just one skill. So let's go over it very quickly. This skill lasts for 5 seconds. It gives you a burst heal when you cast it, and then a hot for the duration of 5 seconds. In addition to that, it deals 2k, that is currently unbuffed, frost damage to enemies around you every 1 second, and enemies that got hit by this dot 3 out of the 5 times are stunned for 4 seconds. So this is our main CC, as well as one of our 2 major sources for frost damage. This skill, as long as we cast it once in around 5 seconds, we are able to continuously keep doing frost damage to our enemies, which obviously procs our Ice Furnace set as well, and deals even more damage to them in the form of Ice Furnace Flame proc. So this set, or this skill, basically deals more damage than it suggests here. We're not even buffed up, but just for the sake of things, let's buff ourselves up real quick and go back into the front bar. So this skill, actually, the heal from it reaches almost 8k, the initial heal. This is obviously just the tooltip values, and the heal over time to 1k per second, and the damage is 2.2k every second, and then there's the stun as well. So really, it deals so much, it does so much for one skill, and it's really important to keep it with as high uptime as possible when you're going offensive or defensive, because it's both your heal and your damage over time. Next up, we have Dip Fisher. Obviously, Shulks it's just a really good delayed damage skill. It helps you with your burst on a warden. You basically cast it, and 3 seconds after the cast, it deals damage to your enemies. It actually reaches almost 17k tooltip once we're buffed up, and it also gives all the enemies hit a major breach debuff, which increases the further damage you deal to them because it reduces their spell resistance. So basically, before you go into your burst, you want to cast this skill and then start hitting the enemies and do as much damage to them as possible. Basically, the usual combination that I do is Dip Fisher into Arctic Blast into Force Pulse, which we will get to in just a moment here, and get all these hitting the enemy player at the same time, plus the Ice Furnace set, and it just deals a lot of damage over just a few seconds that usually gets the enemies down. Next up, we're running Bird of Prey, which is a nice skill for mobility, gives us our major expedition that we really need, like any other build in these days Cyrodiil in this current meta. Really important to be speedy, but also while slotted, it gives us a minor berserk, increasing our damage done by 8%. So all our damage while we're on the front bar is increased by 8% just by having the skill on our bar. We don't even have to cast it at all. Next up is our spammable, and it is Force Pulse. So now it is true that, and I know a lot of people will be asking, I have been using Destructive Clench. I've been using Clench for the longest time on my Warden as my spammable. It is a very nice spammable that hits an AoE explosion rather than just a regular one target spammable, and it does fit the theme of this build as well as most of my previous builds. However, I'm no longer using Master Staff on this build anymore, and so since it doesn't buff our Clench is not really worth using. This skill is not very strong if you don't use the Master Staff, and so now that we're using Ice Furnace on the front bar and don't have the room for the Master Staff, we are using Force Pulse instead. The skill still hits targets next to our initial target, so it still fits the AoE theme even if it's a little bit more limited, and it deals a lot more damage than Shock Clench does, and so it is a very effective spammable for us to use. Deals a lot of damage, doesn't cost a lot of magicka, has great range that fits really well with our Shulk to kind of combine those together for an effective burst. And in all honesty, if you really want to, you can swap to the other morph as well, which interrupts spells and putting the caster off balance is really effective as well. You don't hit in nearby targets, but you do get that additional value of interrupting enemies. So if people you're 1vxing are trying to res each other or cast like channeled abilities on you, you can interrupt them, and it is fairly effective as well. So either morph works with this build. This is just the one that I chose to use. Next, we are using Inner Light. We don't ever really cast this ability, but we have it on our bar just for the passives that we get out of it. So if we go over to the Mages Guild, you will see that we have this this passive that increases our max Magicka and Magicka recovery by 2% for each Mages Guild ability that we have slotted. So on our front bar, both our Inner Light and our Shooting Star, we don't really use either one of them very regularly. We just tend to use them or just have them on our bar to increase our max Magicka and our Magicka recovery while we're on the front bar, which is where we deal most of our damage at. So we just have those passively slotted, just like Bird of Prey, and it increases our overall damage done. Now, we can use Inner Light if we need to detect an enemy, and we can use Meteor if we sometimes feel like this is the correct ultimate to use, but usually we tend to use our Backbar ultimate, which we'll get to in just a moment, and we don't really tend to cast Inner Light either. They are just here for the passive to increase our overall damage by increasing our max Magicka stat. Next, we're going to go over to the back bar, talk about these skills. So we're going to start off with the thing that's going to explain really most of the weird things about this build so far. We are using Blockade of Frost on the back bar. This skill is one of the cores of this build, really. We use Blockade of Frost on the back bar. This skill reads, slam your staff down to create an ice barrier in front of you, dealing 1k frost damage to enemies in the target area every 1 second and reducing their movement speed. Chilled enemies become frozen and are immobilized for 4 seconds. So basically, here's how it works. You put your Blockade of Frost on the ground, and it lasts for the next 13 seconds. My skill is not even fully leveled. It lasts for 13 seconds, and in that time, enemies that stand on top of your blockade are snared. Their movement speed is reduced. They take frost damage, which once again procs our Ice Furnace set, which we've already discussed. And when they are chilled, they become immobilized. Now, how do you make an enemy chilled to make them immobilized? Basically, since we are using a charged Ice Staff with a Frost damage enchant, we have an increased chance to apply status effects by 200% on our back bar, and we even deal that Frost damage to enemies to apply the status effect from it with the enchantment of Ice Staff. So in case you are not aware, using weapon skills, including Destruction Staff, using a weapon skill have a very high chance of proccing the enchantment of that weapon. So basically, when we use our Ice Blockade, even if we swap to the front bar, this Ice Blockade and the enchantment that it procs, which is the back bar enchantment, is charged with the weapon trait. So it has a very high chance to apply chilled and so immobilize the target. Immobilize means basically rooted. So what we have here is we snare our opponents, making their movement speed slower. Then we root them in place, and then on top of that we have Arctic Blast, which deals additional frost damage, which makes the root or the immobilization more reliable, as well as stun them. So one of the things that people complain about a lot with, for example, Fossilize, which is a Magicka skill, is that it both actually hard CCs the enemy, as well as root them, and it is taking a lot of stamina to move away from your spot because you have to break free and then roll dodge. Basically, we are creating our own AoE fossilizes with this concept. We have our Frost Blockade and we have our Arctic Blast on top. Arctic Blast CCs our target and stuns them, and then our Blockade with the damage that the frost damage that Arctic Blast dealt on top of it creates also the immobilization. So the enemies are slowed, immobilized, and hard CC'd, all from the same combination of two skills. Next up, we are using Blueberry. So this skill is basically our, other than our Necropotence activation, just a really strong skill for Wardens. It gives us our major sorcery that we obviously need. It gives us additional Magicka regen, and it clears negative effects from us. So you can stay on your back bar and spam Blue Betty as much as you want when you have debuffs on you to slowly get rid of more and more and more debuffs as you keep activating Blue Betty. Just remove all the negative effects that you have on you. Very, very useful skill, very effective. Run it on every Warden build ever. Living Trellis is our next skill. This is our burst heal as well as heal over time. So one of our burst heals, as we've already discussed, is Arctic Blast, but we also have Living Trellis. And this skill is basically an effect that you put on yourself, which says every time you take damage, you heal yourselves for a certain amount. So every time you take damage, you also get some health back, which makes or gives you the feel that the enemy damage is reduced. The damage the enemies are dealing to you is reduced because you keep getting heals whenever they're damaging you. And when Divines expire, they heal the target for an additional 5k health. And the thing is that you can recast this effect to cause the heal to go off. So you don't have to wait for the 10 seconds duration to get the burst heal out of Living Trellis. You can just use it 2 times in a row and you get the burst heal right away. So very, very effective healing skill. That in combination with our Arctic Blast makes us very, very tanky. And then we're going to move on to Shimmering Shield. This is a very, very strong wing-like or like wings of Magicka skill. And it reads, spin a shield of ice around you, absorbing up to 20k damage from 3 projectiles. The 20k number is really irrelevant here in most cases. What this skill basically does is it absorbs 3 enemy projectiles. So 3 ranged abilities that enemies shoot at you are going to be absorbed and not deal damage to you. Every time that you absorb such an ability, you gain 700 Magicka and Major Heroism. Major Heroism increases the amount of ultimate you get every second, and so when you have Shimmering Shield up, this skill gives you a lot of ultimate generation as well as a little bit more Magicka and reduces the damage you take from projectiles by absorbing the first 3 ones you take. So very, very effective skill for both tanking, getting your ultimate up, and getting a little bit extra Magicka. Next up, we have Ice Fortress, which is our Major Resolve buff, which is very important to have on every build, obviously. Now, Ice Fortress, this morph also gives you minor protection. So not only does it give you your Major Resolve, which increases your physical and spell resistances, it also decreases all damage taken by 8%. Very, very effective. Always use it on any Warden build, just like Betty Netch. Super important to use. And last, we have Northern Storm. This ultimate is the main ultimate we use, like we've already discussed. We don't tend to use Shooting Star a lot, but we do use Northern Storm quite a bit. This is our main ultimate. This is what we build for. Usually, when we want to go offensive, we use this skill. But first of all, let's read what it says. So this skill deals a lot of damage to enemies. It once again is frost damage, so procs Ice Furnace yet again, and it deals damage for 8 seconds every single second, plus reduces the enemy movement speed, so if they moved out of your blockade, you still have Northern Storm to snare them, and it increases your max Magicka by 15%, helping us stack our max Magicka all the way up to 70 or 247 or 50k max Magicka. As well as you and nearby allies gain major protection, reducing your damage taken by 30%. So this goes on top of the 8% from Ice Fortress. So a lot of mitigation. We have the 30% mitigation from here, 8% mitigation from here, and then we have the 5% mitigation from Potentates, making us super, super tanky on top of all our resistances and crit resistances and skills that prevent us from taking damage and heals when we get hit. So overall, very, very tanky. And allows us to play this very, very offensively because we don't have to go back and heal ourselves very often on this build. Only when we take major damage from enemy ultimates, usually do we have to go retreat and actually focus on healing ourselves. Our offensive burst rotation that we usually use on this build, our full rotation would be using Frost Blockade on the ground, popping our Northern Storm and then swapping to the front bar, casting Deep Fissure into Arctic Blast into spamming Force Pulse, and recasting Deep Fissure and Arctic Blast per your need, and making sure your enemy takes a lot of damage from all these sources. You have your Blockade of Frost, you have your Northern Storm, you have your Arctic Blast, your Shulk, and your Force Pulse. Those are 5 different skills in addition to your Ice Furnace and your Light Attack weaves, and you end up with a very, very strong burst that goes on top of our very, very strong offensive stats, and end up with a very, very, very effective way of getting enemy players down. Something that is important to note is with our passives, we are not using the Trifocus passive on our Destruction Staff. The reason we're not using it is, while it is a nice thing for our Shock Staff, it makes it so all our heavy attacks, when we channel them on our enemies, they deal their damage to the nearby targets as well, which fits really well with our AoE theme. However, it is making it so when we are on our back bar with the Frost Staff, blocking costs us Magicka instead of stamina. We have very high stamina recovery and max stamina on this build for a Magicka class, and so we want to utilize our stamina and not offend our Magicka sustain by blocking through our Magicka bar. So we don't want to have this effect on. We want to not have this passive, even if it means a slight disadvantage with giving up the Shock Staff Heavy's benefit. But overall, it is worth it because that way we can still block on our back bar, on our Ice Staff with our stamina pool and not with our Magicka pool. Next, a few more relevant pieces of information. In this build, we are using the Bewitched Sugar Skulls. This is a really, really good food that gives us our tri-stat buffs as well as additional health recovery, which fits really, really well with our build, considering as we are no longer running Vamprism on this build. Now that we don't use a Mist form and we don't use our Vampire Drain anymore, now that it doesn't actually CC this patch, we don't have any good reason to run Vamprism. We can still be a vampire, and it is okay. It still gives us, a lot of strength, like the increased damage mitigation at lower health and the additional resource generation, but it comes with the regular disadvantages of taking additional damage from flame damage and fighter's guild abilities. I personally don't find it effective to run if we're not using any skills from its skill line, but you can run it for the passives if you really like being a vampire nonetheless. For our potions, we are currently using Essence of Health, which are actually a tri-stat potion, which is regular tri-stat. Sometimes we need our health, sometimes Magicka, sometimes stamina, so use a potion that gives us all of them. Since we don't need major sorcery from a potion, this is just a really good potion to run. You can also use Essence of Immovability if you feel the need to prevent enemies from CCing you, but I personally prefer our tri-stat, regular tri-stat potions. As for our Mundus, we are currently running the Lady, like I've discussed earlier. However, you can also use the Mage for additional max Magicka. It will increase your overall damage as well as your actual Magicka pool. You will get to that nice aesthetic number of 50k max Magicka. It will come at the cost of almost 3k physical and spell resistance, because we are currently benefiting that from the Lady, but it is viable to do nonetheless. And in a lot of the gameplay that I've been through to try and test this build, I was using that Mundus, and I like it quite a bit as well. I actually feel like it's better for NoCP than the Lady, but I do feel like the Lady gives you a lot when you're fighting versus multiple enemies and taking a lot of pressure. Next, for our CP, I'm going to go over all my CP trees very quickly. Feel free to pause the video at any point to see exactly what points I'm running. And that's about it. Thank you guys very, very much for watching this build video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you will find it useful enough to use this build as well, or at least take some inspiration from it. I've been enjoying this build a lot in all of my testing to try and make it work. It is honestly the best Warden build that I've had in many patches. I've enjoyed my previous patches builds, but this one just feels so much better with both healing and defending, as well as lashing out burst damage. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like down below and let me know in the comment section if you found this video useful. And If you'd like to see more from me, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. It really means a lot and it helps me grow my channel. I will also put down in the description as well as the comment section links to my Discord where you can ask me any questions if you have any questions about this build or maybe ideas of your own that you would like to discuss, and my Twitch channel as well. I live stream on Twitch several times every week, and I do almost exclusively PvP content, a lot of times on my Warden as well, so feel free to check out that channel and come and chat with me live over there. I will really appreciate you coming over and hanging out with me on my Twitch channel. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end the video with some gameplay footage of this build in both NoCP, BGUs, and CP Cyrodiil. Hope you guys will enjoy, and until next time, have a great time 1vxing everyone.